Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you to another episode of HBCU to Startup. Today, we are talking to Pivotal, and I'm very happy to be talking to Pivotal. Today, we'll be talking about technical interviews, peer programming, and just in general, what it's like to work at Pivotal. So, let's start with Elrisa. We're going to go. We have a full line of panelists, and if you guys could just introduce yourself.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm Elrisa. Hello, everyone. I've been a part of Pivotal since its inception, and I'm in our HR operations team, so I do a lot of the welcome programs for our new hires when they join, as well as I manage our intern program, and I'm also a part of a lot of the diversity and inclusion initiatives here at Pivotal. So I'm really excited to connect with you all and answer your questions to the best of my ability. And that's it.
Simone, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Simone Sequeira, and I have been with Pivotal for a little less than a year. I'm a product manager here, specifically in the labs arm. And currently, I am working out of the Chicago office, though my usual office is San Francisco.
And Jakhara?
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Jakhara Long, and I've been with Pivotal. It's been over a year. I think my year was up in May, and it's been a great experience. I focus mainly on recruiting, but specifically for the sales organization. So anything customer-facing is pretty much what I focus on. So that's me.
Welcome. And good.
Guillermo.
Guillermo.
Yes.
Yes,
Hi.
welcome.
Guillermo, I've been at Pivotal about 3 years, and I'm part of the sales organization.
Welcome, everyone. So a lot of people who are joining, if you're watching, there are a couple of ways to participate and ask questions. One, if you are watching via the Google Hangout app, there is a Q&A app that's a part of the Hangout. Just click on the 9 square icon. It's at the top of your screen. Click on that. It opens up a little dialogue. Click on the Q&A, and then it opens up the Q&A on the side, so you can ask questions to that. If you are watching mobilely through like YouTube, then just tweet your questions to HBCU to Startup, and we'll be able to take your questions. So let's start. A lot of people in the HBCU to Startup community are coming from various backgrounds, and they're looking for opportunities at innovative companies. Could you share roughly how did you find your role, or how did you get involved in your role at Pivotal?
I'll start. So this is Jakhara Long, and again, I'm in sales recruiting. I stumbled into Pivotal, not necessarily on my own. So I worked at another company. It's a business intelligence company in recruiting, and a gentleman that I worked with moved over to Pivotal, and he reached out to me one day, and he basically said, "What's your thought on a startup?" And so my initial response was, "Sean, like, you know me, I don't like a lot of change, and I don't know how I feel about a startup." But the more I learned about the organization, the direction, the technology, the more excited I got. So they kind of reached out to me through Sean. So that's kind of my story.
Anyone else?
I can go next. For me, I was previously in a product management role, but more on the physical product side. I was looking to get into software and to get into the tech industry, and a number of people who I had gone to college with had worked at Pivotal Labs over the years, and so I was aware of the company for a while. So I reached out to some of those people, ended up getting referred by somebody who I went to college with, and was able to come into the organization, learn about software development, learn about Agile development and Pivotal's way of doing things. And it's been going pretty well so far.
And Simone, did you come on as an apprentice initially?
I did, yeah. So I originally joined as an intern, and that was just one of the ways for me to ramp up in software experience.
Awesome. Elrisa here again. So after graduating from college, I initially was going to go into the public sector. I wanted to go into education policy, and I thought that's where my future lied. And after graduating, there was no jobs at the time, and all the internships were unpaid, and I needed to make a living. And so a friend of mine actually gave me an opportunity as a front desk office manager for a company called Greenplum. And Greenplum is now Pivotal as a part of Pivotal, but I started off as a front desk person, and it really helped me kind of get a really good understanding of all the employees here, and it's been instrumental in my role now of knowing the people.
So I was recruited to join. I was working for a big data analytics and consulting company, and I think that Pivotal has a core competence in recruiting. We're in growth mode and have been for a while. So I think that human capital and the people we bring to the company is a function we take pretty seriously, and more seriously than other places I've been. And not just in a hand-wavy sort of way, but it's something we take very seriously, the recruiting, retention, and onboarding of folks. And so I was recruited, and I've been here about 3 years, like I said. It's been a very good experience, and happy to talk more about that in more detail. But in terms of joining, that's my story.
Cool. So when I reached out to the community and told them that we were talking to Pivotal, and if you guys, and Simone mentioned it, there is a certain, you guys are known for the Pivotal way, or the Pivotal way of developing software. Can you talk a little bit about that? You guys are some of like the original creators of and thought leaders in Agile development. I don't know, Simone, do you want to talk about that?
Sure, I can get into that a little bit. So at Pivotal, I think that the form of software development that we subscribe to most closely is called extreme programming. And extreme programming is often considered to be part of that Agile development umbrella. And the thing about it is that it prescribes pretty specific engineering practices and pretty specific processes for the way that you approach projects and for the way that you run projects throughout the course of their life. So, for example, on the engineering side, that's things like test-driven development, things like pair programming, continuous integration. All of those things are very core to the way that we operate. And in addition, there are some other of the Agile practices like short iterations. So often we do 1-week iterations that are started out by an iteration planning meeting with the whole team and capped off by a retrospective with the whole team every week. And for developers, that's often the only meeting, those only 2 meetings that they have to go to. And so you get to spend a lot of hands-on time just on development work.
Can you talk about the interview process? And what was the interview process for? I mean, we have different roles that are represented, but Simone, can you first talk about your interview process?
Sure. For product management, the way that the interviews have been going recently are essentially you are doing sort of a whiteboarding session. So for product managers, you get a particular problem, like an app idea, for example, and on the whiteboard with your interviewers, you work through how you would think through that problem, how you would break it down, and display any Agile development skills that you might have. So you'll go from idea at the beginning of that session, at the end to like what your backlog of user stories would be and how they would be prioritized. I think that designers have kind of a similar process where they're also getting a particular problem that they have to solve. And I'm not actually sure if they have a whiteboard session, but I know that they do have a session where they do work independently, so they get some time to work alone on their problem, and then they do a presentation to their interviewers. For developers, it's typically pair programming, so it's hands-on pair programming. So some teams, some offices will do like a set problem where you will pair program with somebody to solve something specific that has been set in advance. And some offices will have you pair with somebody on their actual project work. So as a PM, when we're writing stories, one of the things that we look out for with our developers is is this a story that could be used in an interview, so that when we have an interview, somebody could come in and pick up something that we're actually working on.
And how about Jakhara? What was your interview process like?
It was pretty quick from what I remember. I joined Pivotal when we were wanting to grow the sales organization quite a bit, so they did a ton of recruiting for sourcers, which is what I am. So basically what I do, I'm like the first line of defense, so to speak. So I'll get on the phone with the sales directors maybe once a week, whereas the recruiter that I support is on the phone with them every day. And so I get kind of the initial idea of what it is that we're looking for, and I go into the market and look for talent. So I'll reach out to people via LinkedIn, or I'll find their contact information. I'll text them. I'll send them a video, something to get them excited. So my process, I think, in actually joining was really quick. It was a referral from Sean. Then I spoke to my boss, and then my boss's boss, and it was a pretty quick turnaround. So maybe like a few weeks.
And we do have a question that came in from Greg, who is founder of Blackson Technology and a big supporter of HBCU, the startup. He wants to know, for people that are coming out of college and they haven't been exposed to methodologies such as Agile or Scrum, how does a student become more familiar with these practices? Does anyone want to take that?
Sure, I can take a first cut. So I think that, and that was Greg, right? Who asked the question? Did you say Greg? Okay. So Greg, great question. I think that part of that answer is really a question for the individual folks who want to join in terms of how they learn. There are obviously many books out there. There's one called, I think it's called Extreme Programming Explained, that was written by some of the early practitioners. There are lots of websites. There are lots of different interest groups that are out there. So I think in terms of just learning more about it from an academic perspective, there's plenty of content. One of the biases that Pivotal has is that the best way to learn is by doing, and that's really something that we bring into practice with our client engagements. While there are folks who would go and do engagements where we would charge someone to coach them in how to do Agile, we believe that the most effective and efficient and long-term sticky way to work with clients is to just work together, so that expertise and those practices stay with the client afterwards and stay there for a long time. So I think that my two-part answer would be learn about it to the extent that you can, and through your appropriate methodologies yourself. And then at Pivotal, it would definitely be an immersion, learning by immersion, learning with clients, and learning by doing.
Thank you.
Sure.
We also had another question from Austin. Austin is a computer science student at Howard University. He wants to know, hypothetically, if you're on an interview and the interviewer asks you a question but you have no idea how to answer, how do you handle that? Anyone?
I think that's a good question, Austin. And I think that asking the question before you, the first thing to do is ask yourself questions like that before you get in the room, which you're doing so good. I think that from a purely signal perspective, it's always good to take a pause. And you want to avoid, you want to watch yourself and rehearse this in a mirror and think about questions that people might ask you, but you want to avoid tics and saying things like or so try to monitor those. And I think an all-purpose way to think is just to stop and pause. And pauses might seem like they're a long time to you, but they're really not. Just stop and pause, and you'll look thoughtful when you do, and you'll look intelligent. And so don't be scared of that. So I think that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is, depending upon the question, right? If it's something that you absolutely have no idea about, and it's plausible that you don't know about that, like if they asked you about a recent merger and acquisition or a new technology, then you should admit up front that you don't know. On the other hand, if it's something that you either know from having learned it at some point or it's adjacent to something you know, then I would digress a bit. And digress is the wrong word, but I would answer from a position of strength and authority. So let's say they asked you about .NET and you didn't know a lot about it, but you know a lot about Java. You could say, look, I understand where .NET fits in. Let me talk to you from an area that I practice a lot, which is in Java. and help you understand where I come from in that area. So that would be my first thoughts. Other folks on the team?
I agree with everything that you're saying, and I think that anytime you go into an interview, you want to arm yourself with information, and you always want to do your research, before you step into an interview. You're not going to know every question that they ask you, but I think a good tool to use, I think Glassdoor is pretty awesome because it's a great place for you to get information about an interview, about typical questions that are asked, so you can maybe prepare yourself. But if you don't know the answer, I mean, it's a tough spot to be in, but I agree. You need to admit that maybe you don't know and maybe ask some questions. I think it's always a good idea to ask questions if you don't understand something.
Yeah. And Austin, I would add too that at Pivotal, part of the culture is that we don't view questions as an indication of ignorance. We view questions as an indication of intelligence. So at the beginning of every day, we do something called a stand-up, which is basically, hey, I'm here, or we're all here in a circle. Who has questions about a project you're working on? Who has tickets for a show tonight? So it's a way just to establish from the start that transparency is important, that you don't have to know everything individually, but if you have the confidence to go to the team and go to the board and try to crowdsource something internally, that's viewed as a positive quality, which is really part of, I think, the paradigm where every individual has to know everything is not a paradigm we subscribe to. We do subscribe to the paradigm that says together we know a lot, and if you'll have the audacity and the honesty to go to the group and ask, that's a good thing. So I would say certainly in the Pivotal context, if you didn't know something, it's entirely permissible to say, I don't know that. Let me ask some questions to qualify that. Here's what I do know, and make it into a conversation as opposed to a yes or no failure.
Great, thank you for answering that. We have another question from, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name, Tyrell. Tyrell wants to know what is the number one characteristic that companies look for in potential applicants? And also, what skill do you feel is most important for entry-level applicants?
I can answer, I guess, part of that. I know one of the, main characteristics that we look for here at Pivotal is your ability to be curious and empathetic. So I know, like, during the interview process, that's something that we measure is empathy. So are you, when you're doing the pair programming on interview day, are you pushy? Are you do you walk over others when they're talking? Do you try to seek and understand the problem before you make an assumption? So I'm not sure if that's a characteristic that is, universal across all companies, but I know at Pivotal that's really, really big. I'm not sure if that's like most important, but definitely for someone who's entry level, I feel like it's just really important to ask a lot of questions and be really curious, because you don't have like all these skills to kind of be like, well, here's what I can do, and even so, I don't think that sort of approach fits our culture. But yeah, I'll let those who like are actual, maybe the rest of you guys can answer.
That's well said. That's well said, Arisa.
And I agree. Even it translates to sales too. Like, that's the number one thing that we look for is just that intellectual curiosity and just someone who wants to know why and just understand. And then also just that cultural fit, because the type of person that does well at Pivotal, it's a unique find. Someone's very hard to find, just because they, especially in sales, we like people who, they might have come from a really large company, but maybe they were working on a technology that was very unique and something that was very cool and trendy and startup. So we just like people to have, to be comfortable in a startup, because that's still what Pivotal is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to build on that a little bit and generalize it, which is to say that a lot of companies, like what people are looking for, what companies are looking for, will vary a lot specific to the company. So to go back to what was said about doing your research in advance, so this is one of those areas where doing your research really helps. So it's not only about like reading about the company and reading about interview questions and things like that, but it's also about talking to people who have worked at that company already. Who might be there now or who have been there in the past, who can give you insight into what the culture is like, what people are looking for. And that's also opportunity for you to figure out when you're going into a place or you're applying, is this the type of company that I want to work for? Is this the type of company where I feel like my characteristics and my personality can be valued, or where I can succeed? And that's part of that fit as well.
Very well said. Yeah. So, Tyrell, I would add a couple things to everything that my colleagues have said, which is one, as important as the things that I think companies are looking for is the things they're not looking for. And I think that, to Simone's point, it's tough to generalize. If I were to try to create one composite characteristic for the person who gets hired and the person who advances through an interview cycle at Pivotal or anywhere else in technology in particular, I think that I would coin a term like being centered. And being centered means you know who you are, you've done the work, you're not trying to portray yourself as someone in an interview that they should hire. Rather, the interview is a manifestation of some deep core characteristics that you're manifesting. So if it's technical competence, if it's empathy, if it's the ability to talk to people, if it's respecting other people's opinions, if it's not talking over people, if it's making eye contact, all those are external manifestations of internally coded behaviors, things that you've developed over time, work that you've done, right? So where you are today is the sum of what you've done up until now. And I think if you break down most interviews, ours included, it's trying to decode that and to do, in our case, over a day or a 2-day period. Our interviews tend to be longer and more multifaceted than most interview processes, or than many interview processes. It's really trying to say, okay, I have this piece of paper in front of me, I have a transcript, I have a resume, I'm spending some time talking to this person, but who is the person and how would they fit here? And to Simone's point, it's absolutely reciprocal. You're also evaluating, who are these people here? Is it real? Are they what they're describing to me? Is that who they are? Because you often think about joining the company, but if you join and 3 months later, either the company's disappointed in you or you're disappointed in the company, everyone loses. So I think that to answer your first question about a single characteristic, obviously a hard question, but I'd say to be centered.
We have a couple of questions that just came in regards to the culture of a company, and this goes back to what you were saying in terms of being you. One of the questions that comes in is, how do you ask something about the standards of professionalism with respect to hair, especially for Black women during the interview process? Does anyone want to take that on?
Not me.
You don't. You don't ask. You just show up as you want.
Very good.
So you just show up as you are.
This is who I am. So take it or leave it.
Can I just say
this every day? I don't know.
Can I just say that my 3 lovely colleagues have beautiful hair?
Thank you.
That's right. That's right, Guillermo. I think one really cool thing about our culture is that everyone is really able to express themselves how they want. For the most part, I've seen employees in San Francisco that are like earthing, so they're not wearing shoes. I mean, we have employees who have like green and purple hair, employees with their dreadlocks, employees with their afros. Like, I think it's just a culture that kind of embraces inclusion and like differences. I don't know. I guess you guys can maybe talk a little bit more to like your experience, but that's definitely been mine, especially from the time on. I wouldn't say that was true maybe 2.5 years ago, because I think we're still trying to figure ourselves out. But now I feel like we have a culture that makes sense, and that we are more aligned across like different parts of the business as well, not just in like labs, but also in Cloud Foundry and in data and in other parts of the company.
And so that leads into the next question in terms of the general culture of a company. And Greg wants to know, what is the best way for a candidate to pose a question regarding the culture of the company? How does he figure out what's the culture of the company, and if it's something that he wants to be a part of? Any suggestions?
Yeah, I can. I think knowing what you want to know. So just like asking very specific questions. It's kind of like a dating game, right? Like you're trying to figure out, is this a good fit for you? And then we're also trying to figure out, like, are you a good fit for us? So my thought is, like, you should be very transparent in what you want to know. There's employees that we've, you know, interviewed that have been like, you know, how many women are employed at how many women are in this office? Like, they care about, you know, diversity and statistics around diversity, but then also, like, you know, what is, if you're a parent, like, what are, you know, what is like the work schedule like? How flexible is it to take time off? In terms of culture, you pretty much, like, when you get on site, so Pivotal office, and you're interviewing on site, you'll get absorbed in the culture. It's very visible everywhere. But if you want to know, like, really specific questions, I think it's good to have those things in mind beforehand, to kind of gauge, like, what part of the culture are you really interested in learning about.
I would say that's a very good question, and I think the question you may not want to ask is, how's the culture? Because what you're going to get back is, in many cases, a marketing summary, which isn't to say that it's false, but is to say that it's a capture that is too general and maybe not helpful. So I would say, come in with some specific questions from which you can derive how the culture is going to be for your micro experience of the culture, whether it's about your family situation, whether it's about your, anything, right? Anything you bring to the table that is important to you and is a part of you. I would ask specific questions. I wouldn't be afraid to ask specific questions, because if those questions aren't well received, maybe that's a tell.
Thank you. So then our next question comes from Mike. And Mike wants to know, how much levity would you recommend during a tech interview? Anyone want to take that?
I'll start. I think that's part of the process. I mean, I think, this is one of those areas where it doesn't sound like a great answer, but you should be yourself. You should, it's hard to, like, go into an interview. It's a very anxiety-producing process and all of that sort of stuff. But, as much as you can, try to relax so that you can be, so that your own personality can kind of show through. And I think that everybody likes somebody who has a good sense of humor. And those sorts of things are part of the conversation. Levity is definitely part of it. Of course, it's not the focus, but it'll happen.
Yeah. I would agree with Simone. I think part of that too is a table read, because what you're trying to establish is rapport in the quickest way possible without it being fake rapport. It's a real rapport based on a commonality of interests, that you want to work for a great company and the company wants to hire great people. So I'd say if you come in and the person is very, say, introverted or low energy, and their energy is that you're not reading that they're going to like humor, then I would sort of follow their lead and maybe tend to mirror where they're going and be a little bit out of phase, a little behind them in terms of, if they're going certain places or portraying certain emotions. But I totally agree with Simone that to the extent that you feel like levity is going to be appreciated, and you've established that kind of rapport, it never hurts, because to the extent that this is a buying situation from both sides, the buying channel, the communication that's happening is really on two channels, right? There's a channel with information and data, which is, you got an A in computer science courses at school, you're available now, your salary requirements are X, and that's within our bounds. But there's a totally other channel that's about, do I like this person? The airport test with this person, do I think that this person would be fun to work with? And although we tend to think that we make decisions based on quant and rational things, in many cases, the first impression's made very quickly, and it's not based on something rational. It's based on something sub-rational. So to the extent that you can bring levity into that discussion, and if it's going to advance that discussion, I would agree with Simone. That's a good thing to do.
Thank you. And so we have a question from Bobby. Bobby wants to know, are there any questions that you would expect or hope for a candidate to ask during an interview? Anyone
I think
want
as
to
a
take
best
it?
practice, it's always good for the candidate to ask the interviewer questions, just to be more curious about their job, what they're doing. I always find that important.
I agree, because I feel like people like to talk about themselves. So if you can get someone talking about, I mean, it's true, right? So if you can ask the interviewer, you've been here this long. I see that you've been doing X, Y, and Z, or you with your previous company, what made you join Pivotal, or what made you join? People like to talk about themselves, so I think that's always good.
Yeah.
All right. So next question comes in from Nicole, and she wants to know, and this goes back to the culture question, what are your recommendations for asking about work-life balance in an interview?
I think it's something you kind of, there's a fine line. You have to be kind of careful with it. And I say this because I had a sales candidate that I was excited about, and I moved him forward to the recruiter. And the first question he asked on the phone with the recruiter is, how many vacation days do I get? Not something you want to hear. So I think it depends on the question that you're asking and like where you are in the process, because it's not the first thing you want to talk about. You don't want the person that is interviewing you to feel that that's the most important thing to you. I mean, even though it is, it's just not the first conversation I think you want to have. Maybe as the process moves along and it looks like a real, position, it looks like something that they're interested in you and you're interested in, I think then you might want to talk about those things, a little bit further, but I don't think you want to lead with that.
I would agree with Jakhara that there are certain questions that become that are a privilege after you've passed a certain level. So it's not an early stage question, but once you've gotten through the initial vetting of I like you and you like me, and it's gotten to a place where you've qualified the opportunity from both sides, I think that opens up a bucket of questions that are not going to be viewed as to Jakhara's point, too bold early in the process. I think you should err on the side of not knowing the culture. You should err on the side of saving those questions till later, to the max extent possible, I would say.
Well, I think I differ.
Cool.
I think it would be really, well, I'm just talking about for myself. I have a 7-year-old, so I'm like, these are the things that I'm thinking about right away. Like, what are my work hours like? I think that's a fair question to ask. Maybe work hours, asking, like how many vacation days I get. That's probably teetering on the other end. But I think, if you want to know just the basics, like, hey, what are the expectations in terms of work, like a general day-to-day? I think it's something that maybe you should talk about when you have like your first on-site, or research. Like on the website, our hours are pretty standard, from 9 to 6 for us engineers, right? And then we get like a 1-hour lunch. It's a pretty like regimented schedule, but then at the same time you don't take work home, so you're not like getting off of work and then going back home and working. At least for engineering roles. Yeah.
I think that there are some ways to go back to what was said earlier about being able to ask a specific question. So you could ask a question like, describe your typical day, and an interview might tell you, well, I come into work at this time and I leave at this time and I have these hobbies, or like stuff like that. So asking questions like that, what are interests that other people have at the who work at the company outside of the office, or do people do things outside the office, and that can give you kind of a gist of what's going on. I can say that for Pivotal specifically, one of our key values is sustainability. So we do have fixed working hours, which is, and in terms of development teams at least. Development teams have fixed working hours. In San Francisco, it's 9 to 6. Chicago is 8 to 5. And there's an expectation that, you know, when you're at work, you're working. If you're a developer, you're pairing. You have a 1 hour lunch. Sometimes there's like presentations or videos, optional things that you can go to during that time. And outside of that, you're not working. So you're not doing hero coding alone at night. When you're coding, you're with somebody else, you're pairing, and you're in the office. So we do a pretty strict work-life balance here.
Simone, why you brought it up, why you just mentioned pair programming, and for those who are coming from different, I guess, backgrounds or different industries and used to more a traditional way of developing software, can you describe pair programming and why it's used at Pivotal?
So pair programming, and I can only really speak to this secondhand. I haven't done it very much myself, but pair programming is essentially you have two people who are working together. They have identical setups, so they each have a monitor, and those monitors are mirrored. Each one has their own keyboard and mouse, and one person drives or does the actual coding and physical typing, and the other person navigates. And so the way that it works is like you have a particular problem that you're working on. The driver is typing the code, and the navigator is making sure that as a pair you stay on track. They're looking ahead in the code, watching out for typos, and the idea is that you are able to have really fast feedback loops. So all the time you're working on problems together, you're figuring them out together, and you're giving feedback on the code that is being written as it's kind of happening. And it is good, or one of the reasons that Pivotal uses that process is, one, as the idea of extreme programming is like, what if we took all of these programming practices and turned the dial up to 11? So one of those programming practices is code reviews. So instead of having a code review, you know, every 2 weeks or every month or before a release, we have code reviews all the time, and that's what pair programming is. So you're working together, looking at each other's code and giving feedback all the time. Another part of it is the sustainability that I just talked about. You know, being required to always pair with somebody kind of limits the amount of coding that happens outside of work hours, and we see that there's improved rates in terms of bug reduction, quality of code, things like that.
Thanks. We have a question from Bobby, and I think that this is a really good question. And their question is, what would you suggest to someone who's going into an interview without a college degree? I think this question is really relevant as we're seeing a lot of software developers now coming out of boot camp, and they may not have a traditional CS background. What tips do you have for someone who may be stepping into an interview, or maybe it's a technical interview or not, and they don't have the traditional background or they don't have a college degree? Anyone?
I could take a first cut.
Okay.
So I would say to that person, be encouraged. Be encouraged. Because I think that at Pivotal in particular, I'll speak to, but in the world in general, you know, if someone goes to college for 4 years and they don't learn, right? And someone else doesn't go to college and is motivated and learns a very precise skill set and brings those skill sets to bear, I think the way the world is going is to try to level the playing field and place less importance on, I went to fill in the name of the high-end school here, and more on what do you know, right? And in interviews, a lot of the questions I ask are, you come with a degree in X, you should know something about these things. Let's talk about that, and just to see what people know. And I think that we could talk about the Pivotal interview process, but the purpose of it is to try to suss out really two things. What do you know? So from a technical capacity and ability to abstract and ability to hold things in memory and relate them and then bring them to bear. So from a technical perspective, what do you know? And we view that as a necessary but not sufficient condition. And then on top of that, how do you relate? What kind of empathy do you have for clients and for those you work with, and for people that are different, right? How do you have the ability to talk to someone who's different, who may be bringing a different cultural context to a conversation, who may be different than you by geography, by gender, by sexual orientation? Can you relate to those people in a way that is satisfying and workable and not fake? And if you look, if we were to do a histogram of the people at Pivotal, we tend to have relatively few people, and keep me honest here, Jakhara and Elrisa, relatively few people who come from fill-in-the-blank schools where we've gone to recruit high-end individuals from named schools, and more people who are coming from non-traditional, atypical sources, whether those are not those schools or people coming from different sources. And I think we're trying to double down and do that more and focus on who you are and not where you went.
Yeah, I think I would plus one that. I think there's a big focus on like your actual coding skills. I'm not sure for what, I think for all of our engineering roles, we do like a 1 hour coding test. It's like a collaborative coding test. And you kind of have to walk through your understanding of the problem and propose solutions. Like you don't have to have like a computer and you're not typing anything out. A lot of the feedback sometimes from our candidates who have a lot of experience, they feel that the interview they didn't get to share that in the interview process because it's really about like, hey, do you know the fundamentals of engineering? And not like, hey, these are all the things that I've done in the past. This is like my wealth of knowledge. Sometimes, you know, people with a lot of experience feel like they don't come in getting to share all of that. However, I think for those not with a lot of experience but with a strong background just in the technical space and just in engineering, fare well and typically pass our test.
You mentioned pass the test. Is there anyone who can give a couple of questions about, I guess, what are some of the tests that you give during a technical interview?
So I think I probably wouldn't use the word test, but I think that without getting too much into the weeds on this, we really, and I'll talk about bringing developers on board, we're looking to ascertain broadly two things: technical capacity, and then call it EQ, call it ability to empathize, soft skills, whatever you want to call that other swim lane. And the first test is technical in nature. To Elrisa's point, it's more of an interview where you're presented with a problem statement, and then depending upon what you say, it can go different ways. But at the end of that time, you're given a score. And that score is on a scale of 0 to 100 or 1 to 10. And then based on the specific context of the hiring situation, you have to have a certain technical number. And I say technical, but there are some other things involved at that grade. A certain number to pass, and you go to the second phase. And the second phase is pairing. One of the things our founder, Rob Mee, has said is that if you were going to hire an actor, you wouldn't hire them based on their description of how they acted in their last movie. You'd go see the movie, right? So we want to see you doing what you would be doing in the wild and for real. So after we ascertain that you have passed a certain gate that is largely technical, we then want you to spend time pairing, because that's what you'd be doing on a day-to-day basis. And so typically you're going to pair with two people, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and they're both going to provide feedback to the hiring manager to say, and to HR to say, here's our view of this person. And I think one of the things that's predicated upon is based on this notion that we want to know who you are. I think anybody could fake for an hour. You can come in and look on the internet and know what the questions are and how to answer those questions. It's tougher to fake for a day. And so if you're somebody who doesn't like to talk to people, if you're somebody who doesn't like to be questioned, if you're somebody who is uncomfortable articulating why you're thinking a certain thing you're thinking, that becomes apparent during the course of a day. And I don't mention those specific things to say they're disqualifying. But I do say those things to say what we want to find out is who the real person is, and doing it over the course of 2 separate instances, an hour or 2 plus a day, tends to provide enough data to make a relatively better decision.
Thank you. And so Greg has another question. He wants to know, what are some of the top general tech questions a candidate should ask? And he says, like, for example, top 3 questions a candidate should ask.
Simone, you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is this that the candidate is asking to their interviewer, or is this that the candidate should prepare to be asked?
Yeah, so I think this is, and I'm just going to speak for Greg on this one. So Greg, sorry if I get this wrong, but the example would be if you're going into a technical interview and the expectation is that a candidate should have questions for the interviewer, what are some of the top things that you would expect a candidate who's technical to ask during the interview?
I'm not sure if I have a really strong opinion on this question. I think that it is good to ask about process. What are the technical processes within the company? How are technical decisions made and things like that? That's something that that's kind of like a personal preference. Those are the kinds of things that I want to know. I think that it also really depends on the type of company that it is and the type of product that they're making. So different types of products have different core technical concerns, and being able to speak to those or being able to ask into those in areas where they intersect with what you care about or where you have experience is important.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's tough to call out three basic ones, because I think that the best questions are questions that are context specific, that show, 1, the knowledge base that you have, and 2, your ability to have a conversation as opposed to, a monologue of, I know Java, so whatever I say is going to be about Java. I think that for the good questions are questions that are intelligent questions, that are in stream, related to something that somebody said, and reflective of you having thought about this before, so that if something comes up, you can say, oh, by the way, here's how this relates to something I learned, or here's something I want to ask you about. So I think they're situational and relatively spontaneous, rather than the 3 top questions, would be my view on that.
I would agree. I think asking questions is just a big part of, just like, again, we were talking about just curiosity, asking questions when you don't understand, or seeking to understand more, and just throughout the interviewing process.
The next question is from Mark, and he wants to know, is it appropriate to bring examples of code that you have written to an interview?
I think that depends on the company. I don't think that that's something that would be used in Pivotal's interview process specifically. We have such a hands-on interview process that you're going to be showing the code that you write, but it might be different at other companies. I can't really say.
And then Tamika actually she asked this question earlier, so I'm just now getting back to it. But she wants to know, what's the weight in terms of if a candidate comes in and they have a certification and degree versus a coding school? Is that candidate dependent, or is that candidate dependent? Sorry, I think she just wants to know the weight of 2 different candidates. One has a certification and degree versus one who has a coding school.
In my experience, I think that the At Pivotal, I know that we do hire from various coding schools. I've personally, in the time that I've been here, I've personally worked with people from 4 or 5 different coding schools, and that is one of the areas where we do hire from. I think that the question about whether it's candidate dependent, I think that it's always candidate dependent. Just more generally, if you know that a company is looking for some certain skill set or they're looking for something that needs to be added to the team and you can bring that and you can show that you can bring that, that can, in a lot of companies, weigh a lot more heavily than whether or not you have the exact degree that they're looking for. So being able to know going into the situation by doing your research or by talking to people at the company or things like that, making relationships, that can go a long way in your application process.
Great, and we have about 5 more minutes and a couple more questions. Nicole wants to know, is it appropriate to ask what's the best way to prepare for the technical interview? So if you're if you've been selected for an interview, is it okay to ask, how do I prepare for this interview? And what are some tips that some other questions that you can ask before the interview?
Can you really prepare for a technical interview, Elrisa?
Well, I don't think there's like I think you just gotta know it. Like you just know, I don't know. There's like no sort of like manual or something that you should research or a code that you should be, even like the way that we code, you don't have to be, have a coding language that you, I think there should be like probably one coding language you feel really comfortable with, but like in terms of like knowing all the various languages, like that's not necessary, especially for like a labs engineer. I'm not sure for Cloud Foundry specifically, but for Pivotal Labs, I know that you don't have to be like knowledgeable in all coding languages. You just have to have like the basics down. I think the best way to prepare is maybe to ask your recruiter questions as to how to prepare for it. They'll give you like some sort of prompt that just basically tells you how the coding exercise will go, and it's very straightforward and clear. Yeah, I don't think that there's like any research you should have to do in terms of like technical research. Maybe Simone, you can add on to that, but I don't want to be giving anyone misguided information.
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer the question, I think it's totally fair to ask about the interview process as you're going forward. You know, when you have that phone screen with the recruiter or with the manager, to ask how the rest of the interview process is going to go. I think that that's fair, and I think that you can prepare for technical interviews. So one book that I've heard is good is something that's called Cracking the Coding Interview. And that's like a popular book. There's another one that is for PMs. It's called Cracking the PM Interview. And what they did is they looked at a bunch of the big tech companies and interviewed people and learned about their interview processes and wrote a book about it so that you can kind of learn those things. But I don't know that those things are necessarily advantageous coming into a pivotal interview, just because, like we've said, the pivotal interview is so hands-on. It's really about what you can do when you're pairing with somebody else.
So the next question, I'm going to combine the next 2 questions, and this will be the final question. Greg wants to know, with regards to transparency, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate to ask in the interview, and he gives the example of, is your company profitable, how are internal conflicts handled, and I think this actually relates to Mike's question about what's appropriate as well, because Mike wants to know if asking about tuition reimbursement for future learning opportunities, is that something that is appropriate to ask during an interview or not?
Well, I think some of those questions can be answered just by hopefully going to the company's website. As far as like tuition reimbursement, some companies make that information public. So, I don't know, maybe you could do a little homework and kind of figure that out on your own. But I don't know, guys. Help me out here.
Pivotal does.
Yeah.
Yeah, we make that
I,
information public.
I agree with Jakhara, and I think that the key principle is you should feel comfortable that before you make your decision of joining, assuming that it's mutually acceptable, you have all your questions answered.
Yeah.
And there's some questions you can't answer, but to the extent that you can answer questions before you join, you should be able to do that. And then it's a question of source and timing. And some of those you can get from publicly available sources. Some of those you can ask in a first meeting, and some of those I would you know, we talked about this a bit. Hedge your bets on the timing, so that you are asking buyer questions after you are qualified as a buyer, or in this case, a seller. But I think that there should be no taboo question, or there should be relatively few taboo questions before you join, to make sure that at least at the time you join, you can do so with a full heart.
And to expand on that a little bit, I think that one of the things is to read that interview a little bit and to decide what question will be appropriate to ask in the interview and not. And sometimes you'll get that interview, you'll feel like it went really well. You might have another interview, and in your second interview, you ask certain questions that you may not have asked in the first interview. Or let's say you get the offer and you have some unresolved things, and you can say, well, I have some questions about these things. Can I talk to somebody in this role, or can I talk to an HR person or something like that to have some of my questions answered? So there should be opportunity throughout the process to get your questions answered.
Well, with that, we are out of time, not out of town. And I definitely want to thank everyone for joining us. Before we go, if anyone has any final words, any final tips for anyone who is out there seeking a job, and also, are you guys hiring? And if so, what are you hiring for?
If you look on our website, it's pivotal /careers.io. We have jobs open in every location, in almost every role, mostly all engineering jobs, of course. So you can find us there. 30% of our hires are from referrals. So I'm definitely, you guys can reach out to me. My email is esnell, as an elephant, SNELL, and we can refer you on over after reviewing your resume. I'm committed to doing that.
Yeah. And I would just say, guys, thank you for your time today. Any one of us would be happy to talk to any one of you, whether or not it's about Pivotal, about your careers. Just reach out to us, and we'd be happy to. That said, Pivotal is a great company. We're definitely looking to diversify the way we look this year, and because the people on this call is not the way Pivotal looks, and we want it to be more reflective of the population in general. So it's a good place. It's a safe place. It's a real place. We'd welcome you to continue this conversation with us.
I appreciate that honesty, that point of honesty. That being said, I definitely want to thank everyone for your time. And again, Arisa gave her email address, so if you guys want to follow up with any of the panelists after this call, please do so. All right, thank you, and thanks everyone who watched. Bye.